Hey, my name is Jay Martin. This is a 2v2 game on grassy flatlands, and I just had a ton of fun playing this game. I played it earlier tonight, and honestly, I'm kind of looking forward to watching the replay generally just to see what happened. But I'm this player here. I'm his GB. With me, also his GB here, this is a guy named Brian, and this is a friend I met recently, and I think Brian contacted me through YouTube. He liked the videos and eventually wrangled me into playing a game with him. It took a while. And I think maybe Brian is a bit newer to sort of competitive multiplayer. So what I want to do in this video, and then our opponents are two really neat guys too. Over here on the left, that's Devil's Legion number 1, and over here from the Mighty AA clan is Alternative, and these are both really neat guys. So this is a neat game because it gave me an opportunity to talk about a few different things. And what I want to talk about first is some tips for some newer players about deploying their army, and then maybe I'll give you a look back over here against the game that Alternative and I played, which I thought was pretty good, and get you in the end game. The first thing I want to note about what Brian is doing is Brian's build. He has 5 rifles. He has 3 cav, and then his regular line of tree is all fencibles. He's brought all fencibles. And you notice that one of those fencibles units has maximum chevrons on it. What Devil's Legion does to start is he sees these unprotected lights. See how these lights don't have line of tree behind them? And he charges cav straight at them. And the rifles, it happens over here too. The rifles actually do a lot better at shooting up the cav than you think they probably would. And this is a mistake that I make quite a bit. I see unprotected lights and I just send cav after them. And it doesn't really ever go as well as you hope unless you hit them from the side or the back. So actually, I think that was probably Alternative's cav. Alternative shoved the cav unit down there. So first of all, the mad charge on the lights oftentimes is a worse proposition than you think it's going to do. It looks like Devil's Legion is going to do a little bit better here because he actually gets into melee. But when you charge against 2 or 3 rifle or against 2 or 3 light units that get a volley off on your cav, they will wreck 1 cav unit. So you got to be careful. Okay, so a couple things about Brian's build that I'd like to point out for new players. The first is his choice in cav. He has Light Dragoon, and Horse Guard. Light Dragoons are really fine units. I find that newer players tend to overemphasize their elite cav a lot. Generally, I'm not a big fan of using elite cav at all. I think elite cav are a luxury that you can afford. I'd much rather have an elite line unit. And the way that most players use cav, cav is a resource. Cav is a tool that you use to disrupt their infantry. You don't really ever want to rely on cav to break infantry on their own. Hence, using really expensive elite cav is kind of something that you don't need. So I kind of recommend, and there are exceptions to this obviously, but I kind of recommend that you don't use elite cav units. Now, this is maybe the most important thing if you're a newer player, is that fencibles or militia units are not very good. You don't want to make your whole line out of fencibles. You don't want to make your whole line out of militia. There are a bunch of reasons for this. The first is that their stats suck. Like their accuracy sucks, their reload sucks, yada yada yada. They cannot stand toe-to-toe with that Swiss foot unit right there. They'll just get chewed up. And the second big problem with them is they cannot form square against cav. Now, it looks like, honestly, Devil's Legion has burned all his cav, taking out the rifles. So he's going to get a free pass on that one. But if my opponent spawned and I saw him with all fencibles, I would kind of start to drool, and then I would save all my cav. Like, I wouldn't worry about the rifles that Devil's Legion did. Now, he might have a better idea than me, but I would really just want to rupture all of his line right there with cav. So the reason you don't want to take fencibles is they're really weak to cav. The other issue is how to distribute chevrons. A couple rules to stand by in chevrons. First, you want to distribute them in odd numbers only. The reason is that the odd-numbered chevrons give them their extra morale points. So 1 chevron is good, 2 chevrons is bad, 3 chevrons is good, 4 chevrons is bad. You want to distribute them in odd numbers. The second thing to keep in mind is that chevrons get incrementally more expensive. The first chevron is like 10% of the unit cost. The second chevron is like 10% of the unit cost plus $10 or so. It scales, so you know the fifth chevron is much more expensive than the first chevron. So if you gave me the option with all this extra money that got spent on a militia, I would rather use it to bring a better general. Oh, I guess he did. Never mind. Okay, we'll come over this in a minute. But if you're going to put a bunch of chevrons on one unit, that's kind of a waste. You'd rather distribute them amongst a bunch of units because you'll get that morale bonus against a whole bunch or across a whole bunch of units, and it'll be on balance cheaper. The other thing I was going to say is that instead of spending all the chevrons, I would rather put it into a good general. And obviously what Brian's done here is he's using militia units because he's got the really expensive general and really good cav and all the rifles, so he can't afford regular lines, so he's using militia. This is a strategy they don't really recommend if you're really, really good at the game. You can try this as sort of an experiment or a challenge thing, but generally you don't want to do that. And look at, you notice this unit is routing, you know what I mean? Like that, those chevrons didn't buy him a whole lot. And then the other thing I noticed is that putting chevrons on your general unit doesn't do anything. It doesn't enhance the general's ability to inspire or anything like that. All it really does is improve the general's combat stats, which are kind of irrelevant because you don't want to be using your general in combat anyway. Okay, so those are some of my thoughts on Ryan's build. And you notice over here that the line infantry, once it got in close, did rout those rifles pretty quick. So I would kind of suggest that instead of... It's really tempting to charge your cav at naked lights like that, but you're better off saving your cav for a better target. Maybe if I was going to... And I'm sure that the Greek Devil #1 here is like, yeah, man, my cav didn't do shit. You know, I really would have liked to save those. I mean, it doesn't matter because he's fighting against an army of all militia, so it doesn't really matter. But that's kind of some thoughts. And another thing to notice is, you know, from Brian's perspective, is just how poor the militia perform. That they're really not a substitute for line infantry. They're not dealing too many casualties to Devil #1's army here. So you know that's something to keep in mind. So if you're a newer player, those are some things to think. You want to bring regular line infantry, a build that I recommend that all new players bring. And I think Terminator has a really good post on this somewhere on TW Center forums, is just bring a lot of line infantry. You know, when in doubt, just learn how to maneuver them. Bring some lights if you want, but bring a lot of line infantry. Over on my side, we actually had a really good game over here, and I've obviously missed a lot of it. This is a unit coming back from routing right there that I managed to get an emergency score. I was a little disappointed I didn't route that chasseur, but we fought each other to a bit of a standstill here. I do have a fair amount of advantage because all of my lights are still alive, and I do have a little cav unit left. And I think that at this point, the game between Alternative and I, which actually was really good. I should maybe do a second video just focusing on this game. But I kind of, you know, can overwhelm him now. I have a little preponderance of firepower, and with all my lights, if I wanted, I could get all rangy on him and do all that. But we played a really solid competitive game over here, and I want to say GG to him. I get really lucky. I have this unit of militia comes back from routing, and I don't even notice it until right about the time where that Chasseur Cheval unit goes to get me. Do I even react? Yeah, I react right there, maybe? I don't really know what I do, but I think my militia maybe routes that cav right there. And you're going to get to watch just the tail end of the engagement between Alternative and I. His general actually causes me quite a bit of problems. I did a lot of stuff to try to kill that fucking general, and it didn't do a whole lot for me. He has an old guard. Yeah, he has an old guard right there that's still kicking. That's hurting the morale of my guys, but... It actually, Alternative and I played what I would say is a really classic template for a game. We had the initial engagement, and we kind of exhausted a bunch of resources. Then we both withdrew a little bit to regroup. And I spent probably way too much time re-engaging with Alternative, honestly. If I was playing in like a 3v3 game, I should have engaged him a lot quicker. With 2v2s, I noticed that if you're playing with, you know, more respectable players, that a lot of times 2v2s get traded as dual 1v1s, or a couple 1v1 matches that are both happening on the map at the same time. So in this particular map, I asked Devil's Legion #1 if he'd let us finish our game out real quick before he engaged me. And he was polite enough to say yes, and Alternative was polite enough to go along with that. So thanks both you guys for doing that. And you can see that right here when I routed Alternative's first unit on the flank, I was able to, that won't take very long, and then I'm able to turn my resources back this direction. So that's kind of the game with, or the part of the battle that featured Alternative, and I thought he played really good. He had a ton of cav in this game, and I think I got off a little bit lucky in this particular game because his cav didn't do as much damage to me as it should have. I think on 2 separate occasions he had cav in the middle of my lights, so none of my lights routed. I did play him a little different than I normally do. I kept my line much closer to my lights than I do in most games. One little thing I noticed at the beginning of the game was like, fuck, he has a lot of cav. So I kind of, on purpose, kept my line a bit closer to my lights than I usually do, and that kind of gave me, I got a good result out of that. So that's something I might think about for future games. But what's going to happen, you don't really need to watch the micro of this because it's pretty obvious that I'm going to rat here. But the big problem from a 2v2 standpoint is that Devil's Legion #1 came out of his engagement with Brian with just a ton of units left. And more importantly, I think he's got 3 old guard. Yeah, there's at pretty much full strength. One of them's down to 100. I think maybe another one's down to 80 if I'm lucky. Where is it? There's an old guard. So he's got an old guard at 100 and an old guard at 113. I'm certain there's another one. There it is. It's even got a chevron. It's at 110. So my problem is I finish wrapping up Alternatives. I look over at this and I'm thinking, man, there's no way I can do that. And I honestly think that I don't know how. I think if I was going to beat this army here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 line, and I think he has 3 volts left right now, so that's 12 units. I think I'd really need cav to be able to beat him right now. I don't think I'd be able to fight an army that's still that strong with. I certainly don't think I can do it with what I got left. We were actually talking right now, and we were kind of arranging terms of the engagement. And I honestly think the only real way that I could beat him right now with what I got left, because Alternative gave me a hard fight, man, is if I kited the shit out of him with my lights, and I didn't really feel like doing that. It seemed kind of like a cheap thing to do, and I wasn't really that concerned about actually winning the game. So we were talking, and essentially I said, well, I don't think I can beat you. Why don't we just line up and march at each other? And he kind of said, he was really polite, and he said, I tell you what, why don't you stay there and I'll march up at you, which is a really polite, gentlemanly thing for him to do. And I said, no, let's just go get it. And so what you're going to watch right now is bad generalship. If this is a real war, we'd probably withdraw for the night, right? And then I'd probably retreat to go get reinforcements, but he was a real gentleman about it, and so was Alternative, and Brian stuck around to watch the engagement. This won't take very long for him to rout me. He outnumbers me pretty good. He actually out-qualities me a lot as well, honestly, and he just goes in for melee, which is all he really needs to do to win the game. And that turns out to be it, but I want to say great game to the guys that we played with, and this is really fun. And Brian, it was good to get you into more of a competitive multiplayer match than you're used to playing, and just keep that in mind. Bring regular line infantry and put your lights in front of your line. And I have some tutorial videos on my channel. I know there's a ton of videos on my channel, so it might take some time to scroll through them to find them, but they might come in handy for that kind of thing. So GG to everybody for playing, and thanks for watching. I'll check you in the next video.